Welcome to the program. My guest, David Serretta. Welcome to the program, my friend.
Thank you, Michael.
It's a pleasure to have you. I want to thank you for taking the time out to be with us tonight. And, well, how are you doing?
Oh, very, very good. Very excited about a lot of things right now.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, I was doing a lot of listening and a lot of reading up, and I think we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation here tonight.
Oh,
so maybe we could start out, what is pyramid power? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the idea that the pyramids have the ability to produce some power is not that new anymore, but it's kind of a good foundation for where I've gone. I've done a lot of studies with testing solid-state physics materials on the human body energy field. And solid state means the study of crystals and every type of gem you can imagine, and every element on the periodic table. And in this study of solid-state physics, you're looking at conductors, which are metal-type materials that can move electrons, you know, like you use copper wire and you run electrons through the copper wire like drops of water down a river, and they hit the blender turns, and the computer comes on, and the lights come on. That's all from the movement of electrons in a conductor. But in the world of semiconductors, which is more crystal-based material and gems, it was actually in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident, that three scientists, John Bardeen, Will Shockley, and Will Bratton, had finally invented the world's first miniature crystal amplifier. And they found, you know, before 47 that crystals had free electrons floating on the surface, whereas metals, the electrons were bound in the atomic shells inside of metals, so they weren't much use other than running current through a wire. But crystals had this power just sitting there, like, you know, passengers trying to get on the train. These little electrons could jump onto a wire and produce some amplification, so you could get rid of the old radio tube amplifiers and move on to crystal amplifiers. And they finally got this little crystal amplifier to work, and it became known as the transistor. And the transistor is a multi-layered, the first transistors were multi-layered materials between germanium crystal or quartz crystal and some minerals like boron or phosphorus and gold. And when I saw, like, the way transistors work to get the electrons to move from point A to point B is they have different layers of materials. So you need, like, voltage means difference, or you can create difference. Here, this is an easy way to understand it. It's a very hot sunny day and there's no wind and there's no clouds, but as soon as a cloud comes over and it cools a patch of air underneath, all of a sudden you have wind. And that's because you've created an imbalance in the temperatures, which is difference. And difference is voltage. It causes energy to flow from one place to another. So when I looked at the pyramids and I looked at the theory that they were just power supplies, I thought, you know, this isn't what they're really doing, because there's not really much power there as a power source. But they were made with these different layers of semiconductive, which means crystalline material, and some conductive material. They had a granite core and a dolomite limestone. They had two different types of limestone outer casings, and I thought, you know, those are different stratas of material. They must be trying to create difference, which means to cause energy to flow. But there's something even more amazing about transistors. See, transistors, this little invention, ended up turning into an Intel computer chip in the Silicon Valley with, in the 70s, about 2,700 little tiny crystal transistors on a single chip, and you think that's a lot. Today there's 2.7 plus billion transistors on a single Intel chip.
Wow.
And each one of those little crystals is amplifying, you know, signals, different tones of color, you know, all of the millions of functions that are happening on your computer need amplification. So that's why we can cram so much information in a tiny cell phone and also a tiny computers now, is because of crystals. But where we're speeding towards, smaller and smaller crystals, I was looking at the pyramids saying, wait a minute, these are giant, multi-layered, semiconductive, conductive layered materials. There has to be a way greater purpose for these pyramids than anybody's ever thought of. And I realized that they were probably either early massive transistors that were in ratios of star systems. You see, everybody knows Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval have been saying, well, the ancient people of Egypt were making maps of the stars. And I was saying, no, I don't think that's what they were doing. I don't think they would build structures of that size and shape out of multi-layered material if it was merely just to mirror image the stars.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think so either. I always thought there was a much bigger purpose for them pyramids, too. And I often wonder if we'll ever find out what they are.
Well, tonight you are. You're going to find out. You know, one of the things that tipped me off is my brother, Michael, was helping this friend of his, Jeff Reeves, was building a pyramid house in Tofino, British Columbia on Chesterman's Beach, and this was way in the 70s, 80s. It was actually in the 80s. And I've been in that house, and it's perfectly flat ground, not a lot of obstructions. And when the frame was up, it was lined magnetic to magnetic north, and it was the same dimensions as the Great Pyramid, but on a smaller scale. So the slope angle and everything, the width by the height was all pi and phi. Everything was all the same harmonics of the Great Pyramid. And Jeff Reeves, the owner of the house, asked one of his workers to throw him a box cutting knife. And this guy throws him a box cutting knife, and they're pretty big, about 9 inches long, and it lands on the ground. He looks at it, turns his head, puts a hammer in, puts a nail in, and turns back to get the knife, and it's gone. And Jeff literally stopped all construction of the house and had the workers comb every inch of that flat platform, and it was gone. The thing was gone. And that really behooved me to the idea that there's a way greater power at work here than we can possibly imagine. And it's possible that pyramid energy can open up an actual stargate to move a physical object or a person to another dimension of the universe, or possibly another place, just because of the harmonics of the power of the way the geometry of a pyramid works and the materials causes electrons to move. And so the electrons are the carrier of the electric force. They're responsible for everything in electronics. They're actually still one of the smallest subatomic particles ever discovered is the electron. So I began to, I saw a film by Patrice Pouillard. It's a new film. It's on the Great Pyramids. And there was this mathematician who wouldn't show his head. And if you look at the top of the Great Pyramid, he was saying, okay, it's a square. And if you take your compass from the center to the sides and draw a circle, and you do your math, your radius times 2 times pi to get the circumference of that circle, and then you go to your corners, you get a bigger circle. And if you're working in metric, 10-base math, you subtract the smaller circle from the bigger circle, and you're left with a scale of the speed of light in metric, which is just under 300,000 kilometers per second. And you're like, how the heck could the builders have known this number in metric of all math forms? How did they know the speed of light? Because the speed of light wasn't discovered until 1972. It was not quantified accurately, incredibly accurately, until 1972. And even in 1972, it had an error of plus or minus 2 to 3%, 1 to 2%, I think it is. So I decided to do all the math myself on all 4 sides of the Great Pyramid, and the guy was right. And I said, what is the speed of light doing in the pyramid? And I said, the only thing it could be there for is that's what you measure electromagnetic frequencies that are generated by a crystal with. It's your measuring rod. So I took all of the dimensions of the Great Pyramid with the theory that it's a giant crystal oscillator, which A crystal oscillator and a transistor are kind of similar. Crystal oscillators, if you remember in the 70s, you had those, Timex watches, and it said quartz timing. You could see it said quartz on the watch. And that meant there's a little tiny piece of quartz crystal in there with some electricity running through it, causing the electrons to spin around inside the quartz at a very, very high rate of frequency, over almost 40,000 times a second, to keep accurate time. And so all you need is a little bit of electricity in something like a pyramid, a great pyramid, to get those electrons to start spinning. So I did all the math. It took me 3 months to I calculated 180 frequencies, and there's way more than that, but just in the base of the pyramid all the way to the top. And I was looking at the numbers and going, oh my God, nobody's ever seen these numbers. These numbers are unbelievably perfect, sequential firing sequences that are mind-blowing. So I got a signal generator program, and I started generating all the signals of all the frequencies. And I built a crystal oscillator transmitter that I put into flashlight tubing. And there's a video of this on the internet if you go to my YouTube channel, Spaceman99. And when you transmit frequencies, like a single frequency, like 432, which a lot of people like these days, and you set magnets on dishes, which I did, if you transmit any single frequency, the magnets will merely vibrate or oscillate on the dishes, which is kind of cool. But with the pyramid numbers, they start spinning around like planets spin around the sun in these giant circular orbits, and they're very aggressive. And I'd never seen anything like this. In fact, I showed it to some NASA engineers, and they said they've never seen anything like it either. The pyramid frequencies were so incredibly timed, slightly out of phase with each other, that they could cause magnets and possibly explain gravity and anti-gravity and everything under the sun in the world of zero-point energy. So I thought that, remember, we have the disappearing box cutting knife in a pyramid. And I thought, there must be a possibility that the pyramids, when the electrons start spinning in the crystal, and the pyramids are all laid out, the Great Pyramid is laid out with 3 pyramids, and they're all in the ratio of Orion's belt, a very distant star system. I said, is it possible that these 3 pyramids, all working together, powered by electricity, were able to the harmonic field that could send a person to that star system or somewhere else, another dimension of Earth or somewhere else? And it made sense to me that I could, at least by looking at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I could use these harmonics on the body, the human body, and consciousness and see what would happen. There's a physicist named Fritz Albert Popp in Germany, good physicist, who proved, not only theorized, but proved that all living things that have DNA emit light signals, which are called biophotons, living photons of light, from the DNA faster than light speed. So let's look at the 3 pyramids in Giza, or in the ratio of Orion's belt, and Orion's belt is, those 3 stars are over 1,100 light years away, which means if you're sending a regular radio signal trying to communicate with them, it's going at the speed of light. It's going to take 1,100 years just to get there, and by the time it gets there, it's going to be massively distorted. But biophotons can go there instantly, but it gets even more amazing because what this means is you need technology to vibrate the body's DNA with the harmonic ratios of that distant star system to tell the biophotons to go there. In fact, this is really amazing because the idea that there is such a thing and such a possibility that we could be wasting all of our time with SETI, the search for radio signals in space from another star system, would really, really disrupt hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. and SETI's using these giant radio telescopes. They've never seen an intelligent signal from another star system. But what if you need consciousness to interface with technology to get a proper signal? So I started transmitting in our bedroom, and I've been meditating every single day for over 30 years now. I'm 51 years old. And I start transmitting the pyramid frequencies in the room, and my wife just passes out. I'm watching the transmitter, and my wife wakes up 30 minutes later, and she says she met a space being named Ashtar, who showed her 3 major events that were about to happen on our planet. And the first one, he said, is 6 months from now. It's going to be a huge event. And she was thinking, it's got to be something like a tsunami or something like that. He didn't tell her what it was. And it came to the middle of July. And the middle of July was the biggest heat wave. The 4,000 temperature records were broken in the United States. We lost 75% of our wheat and rice and grain crops. And not only that, Europe had some of the greatest droughts, and other countries were having some of the biggest floods in history. 4,000 temperature records broken. So how the heck did sending out the pyramid frequencies get her a meeting that was incredibly accurate, and yet he showed her there's 2 more events behind that one that were even bigger. So that was just the beginning of doing this. And I started doing it on my body after and during meditation. And one of the first things that happened to me is simply unbelievable who I met. There's no way I can talk about it on the radio because somebody might want to kill me. I mean, there's fanatics out there. So I have to be careful. I couldn't believe who I was meeting. And it got more and more amazing. We found that if you use the pyramid frequencies, with meditation on the body, that it amplified whatever your intention or question was. See, the heart produces, this is in our movie Quantum Communication, the heart produces a magnetic field that is at least 60 times stronger than the brain. The important thing is it's an actual magnetic field. So we know that magnetic fields are part of what triggers consciousness. Magnetic fields don't go faster than light, but I believe they trigger the DNA to send the faster than light signals. So if you could know the harmonic magnetics of a particular star system and beam your body with that, you would project a lot of your digital self to that star system. And if there was anybody in that star system who was incredibly advanced, they would see that signal because that's a faster than light signal. So I thought, where better to start than where British astronomer Robert Temple, when he wrote the Sirius Mystery, in the 70s actually was his first edition of it. He risked his entire career as a serious British astronomer to prove that mermaids and mermen came from Sirius many thousands of years ago and were some of the first founders of human civilization. And he shows, the ancient Greeks had this, half man, half fish god named Oins, and the Chinese, the oldest founders of civilization in China are these 2 fish gods. And so the idea of mermaids and mermen is not new. There are a lot of people who believe they have seen them, including some of the earliest explorers from Europe coming to the Americas and when they crossed the Atlantic. So anyway, I thought, well, wow, Sirius is only 8.7 light years away. I mean, that means a normal radio signal would get there pretty fast, but NASA knows the dimensions of Sirius A and B. They know the radius, which is the distance from the center of the star to the rim. And if you know the radius, you can calculate the frequencies. So I calculated, based on real NASA data, the frequencies of Sirius A and B. And I was really amazed that nobody thought of this. I mean, this is when you have, countless billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. You've got to imagine that each one has a slightly different radius because they're not all the same size. I mean, even look at apples and oranges on a tree, and they all have slightly different radiuses. So that means they all have slightly different frequencies. And when you have sets of stars, which is what constellations are, they're set up in geometrical patterns that are completely uneven. And in that unevenness, each one of them has a unique frequency. So when you have two or more stars together, vibrating as a set, like a cello and a violin versus just a single instrument, those two frequencies together are even more rare anywhere in the local galaxy. So if you were to vibrate those two frequencies into your DNA, your biophotons, because we know this, Fritz Albert Popp proved this, they go faster than light to the target. So that means your matrix digital self goes there. So I started pulsing Sirius A and B in my room. And when we first started doing it, after meditation and going into sleep, it was a little scary because there were some military helicopters that kept coming and we kept turning it off. Then I actually felt the beams moving in the wall one night and I turned it off. So I was really, amazed how powerful those frequencies were. When you hold a magnet near the transmitter, it moves in your hand. You can feel a pulse. You can't hear these frequencies because they're beneath the human ear.
And if that's drawing black helicopters, then that would tell me that, they're well onto this.
Well, you're going to see how well they're onto it. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Michael. They're really onto it. So I did it. I transmitted to Sirius A and B, and that night, all of a sudden, I'm, on the astral plane in my dream. I'm on a spaceship, and the goddess Isis. And Isis, her temples date back before the first Egyptian dynasties. So she's pre-dynastic Egypt. She goes way, way back. And her husband Osiris also, the two of them, and her sister Nephthys are ancient deities. And Nephthys gives birth to Anubis, who seems to be a shapeshifter who can shapeshift into a dog, a big, a black jackal. That's the dog Anubis, the god of the underworld. So they're really, really ancient beings, very powerful. She's on the spaceship with me. She's over 8 feet tall, and she is the master of resurrection. In the ancient Egyptian books, her husband is drowned by his jealous brother, and he dies, and she brings him back to life. She resurrects him. And I'm walking this plank on the spaceship. She throws me out into space, and she turns my body into a pure waveform of energy. I don't have arms, legs, or feet anymore in my astral body, and I'm just this spiraling waveform. And she reconfigures something in me and brings me back to form, back to my astral body form. And then she shows me she does it to another person. And I thought, I could not have dreamed this stuff in my mind. And anybody who knows anything about dreaming knows you can't think of something before you go to bed and dream about it. I was not thinking of Isis. I was not thinking of resurrection. And this was my experience. This is what happened to me. And it made so much sense because you know that when you vibrate your DNA with the harmonics of a certain star system, part of your digital self, which is your astral light body, biophotonic light body, goes there because those are the harmonics you're putting in your system. I was so blown away at how often it was working that I could pretty much figure out the codes on all of the local systems. I then tried Alpha Centauri, which is even closer. Alpha Centauri is our closest. Alpha Centauri A and B. So you have an A and B star. So you have two unique frequencies. And when I was meditating with Alpha Centauri, I just got a really amazing energy come into my consciousness. I was like, wow, this is a real velvety, real cosmic kind of a high. And it's even possible we're part of Alpha Centauri. They're that close, 4.2, 4.3 light years from Earth. So very, very close. I didn't have any being show up to me that night, but things started happening in the following days. So this is the beginning. This is transmitting harmonic codes of different star systems into the body, based on the theory that the pyramids are crystal oscillators in the ratio of star systems, it's very, very plausible that what we're talking about is a technology that existed. We know now, actually, the pyramids are older than the first dynasty in Egypt because of Robert Temple's new work in that area. So the most common arrangement of pyramids in star systems, according to Wayne Herschel, a brilliant young researcher. Have you had him on your show ever, Wayne Herschel?
No, not yet. I haven't.
Well, you got to have him on your show.
My list.
He wrote the Hidden Records, and the Hidden Records pretty much proves that there were more pyramids and mounds in England in the ratio of Pleiades than any other star map on the whole pyramid scheme on the entire planet. In fact, Wayne Herschel even takes the Cydonia pyramid complex on Mars and he superimposes Pleiades, and most of the stars match up with a pyramid perfectly. So you realize that Pleiades were the most common pyramid arrangement. In fact, there was a major news coverage that went to Guatemala to Tikal, the pyramids in Central America, and there they talked to the local native people who told them that these pyramids are in the ratio of Pleiades because beings came from Pleiades to visit them and build them. Well, Pleiades are 440 light years away. You're never going to, even if you were doing the speed of light in a spaceship, which is impossible, you're never going to get from Pleiades to Earth. I mean, it's a 440-year journey. So going at the speed of light. But now... That's
a long trip.
It's too long of a trip, but remember the disappearing pocket knife, box-cutting knife, and this guy was just building a pyramid. There was no power going through it. And it gets more and more interesting because, one of the main things I've been doing in the last 4 years, is I've been doing, first I started doing about 4 years ago tests to see if the human body voltage could be raised by connecting the body to crystals, good quality crystals that you can buy in gem shops. And I found that because in the world of solid-state physics, there are these free electrons floating on the surface of crystals, and if you touch them, you should see a little bit of a change in the body voltage. So I got a voltmeter, and if you put it on the 200 M or millivolt setting, because on the surface of the skin, through the galvanic skin response, you can measure body voltage on the surface, tension on the skin. And, I've personally measured with my wife in conferences probably 1,500 people now. And I've never seen anybody above 30 millivolts on the fingertips, naturally. And so I started, working myself on my own body voltage, just touching natural crystal, and I could see a little improvement, just a little bit. So I started realizing and researching in solid-state physics that crystals have memory. They have electronic memory. They have good vibrational memory. And actually at Stanford University, they've stored movie files in crystal. And they could be the hard drives of the future because they have a lot more potential storage space than magnetic drives do. So I started programming harmonic codes in the crystal. And we started with the vibration that NASA recorded of the sun, the actual NASA wave file. And I built these quantum energy generators and treated crystal pendants with these, which people can find at lightstreamtechnologies.com. And when people touch them, you'd see their millivolts go way, way up. I mean, way, way up. And then when they let go, if they were low, like if someone was 5 millivolts or lower to begin with, even when they let go of the pendant, they were way higher. Then we did aura camera photography, and we found before and after contact with the harmonically treated stones, people's auras were so much brighter that it looked like I know no one's going to believe me when I show them these pictures because it's almost too hard to believe that There's that big of a deal. There's that big of an improvement in the human body aura. But we were talking about people going from at the most 30 millivolts as their baseline all the way to 200 and slightly over, which is unbelievably huge amplification. The first transistors, in the early days, in the 60s, we had these transistor radios come out, and I was, as a kid, I bought them. They had a couple of transistors in them, which, without the transistors, you couldn't hear a radio broadcast for more than 50 miles away from the radio tower. But because of transistors, you could hear it from hundreds of miles away, very clearly, but not amazingly clearly. There was a lot of static even in those days with just a few crystal transistors in your radio. They were amplifying voltage on the millivolt scale, which is a thousandth of a volt scale. The same, actually less amplification than I was getting on the human body touching my crystal pendants. So if you think of the human body as a radio transmitter receiver, and now at major universities, scientists are admitting that DNA is an antenna. It can broadcast and receive radio signals. This is actually being done at major universities. Now, radio signals only,
It kind of reminds me of the Star Trek stuff, where they would beam them up. They would kind of turn into like an energy. Yeah.
Well, because, see, we're electricity. We're just little wavelets of energy. Our nervous system is running positive and negative ions, which are just extra electrons attached to atoms, which are bigger than the electrons that go through the wires in the house, electricity. So we're electrical beings with vibrations, that physical vibrations that can range from, 4 or 5 waves per second in deep delta brainwave states to 30 or 40 when we're active in the middle of the day. So we are actual little wavelets of energy. That's all we are. And if you could vibrate us up to a really high degree with a giant crystal oscillator, which is what the pyramids were, then it would be just like Star Trek. It would turn you into a pure light form, and you would go shooting off somewhere. So this gets really amazing because when there's a family in Central America at the Chichen Itza pyramids, which I've visited before, and we know the pyramids in Guatemala are in the ratio of Pleiades, which we're going to get into momentarily. And those pyramids are made of calcium carbonate, which is a really good semiconductor. Very high electrical charge in calcium carbonate, which is coral, basically. And the guy's got an iPhone, and there's a lightning storm going, and he takes a picture and happens to take a picture right when the lightning strikes the ground. And the second the lightning strikes the ground, at the top of the pyramid is a big beam of light going shooting out into space. And I went, wow, I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what that means. And this is where things really, really heat up. There were...
All right. David, hang on right there. Hold your thought. And when we come back, we'll continue with that story. And I remember seeing a picture of pyramids, and there was a beam of light coming out. And, I didn't know if it was real or not, but I have heard about that type of phenomena. So we'll talk more about it as soon as we come back from this break. David Sarita is my guest, and we'll take calls shortly at 347-989-1012. This is Late Night in the Midlands, and I am Michael Vera, and we'll be right back.
Is there proof of God's existence in our government's records?
In the Midlands, and I am Michael Vera, and my guest is David Sarita. And we're talking about pyramid power. We're talking about the pyramids, talking about sending signals and even, I guess, holograms in the speed of light. So very interesting conversation here, and we will take calls shortly. 347-989-1012. If you have a question or a comment, just press 1 so we know you want to get on the air, because we do get a lot who listen on the phone line. So it's the only way I'll know you want on is if you press 1. I do urge you to get over to www.latenightinthe midlands.com, become a member, and be informed And while you're at it, share our content. It helps us grow. It really does. And I do have our guest tonight linked up over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com as well. Just click today's event. You'll see David Sarita there and Late Night in the Midlands. You click on that and got the bio and the website links right there for you. So we're going to get back to it here. And David, I kind of wonder, I guess it's kind of a multiple choice question here. So the ancient people or whoever they were that built the pyramids, so either humans were a lot smarter than we give them credit for, or they had help.
Well, they either had help or there was a very great civilization that predates ours and that ended due to something like a pole shift. And, what I did next, before I'm going to actually prove to you that the government is working on faster than light signaling, I looked at the Pleiades and I said, well, they're 440 light years away, and there's no way that NASA has the radius of any of those stars, so I can't figure out their frequencies. But because there's so many of them, I can get a very unique ratio of harmonic codes by doing taking a NASA Hubble image of Pleiades and doing all the wave functions of the ratios, because ratio is on music is how you get unique musical signature. And when you have different instruments with different keys and scales, each song that you make with more and more instruments sounds completely unique from a different song. So the Pleiades basically had its own song. There are more of them, more pyramids anywhere in the world, as Wayne Herschel proved, in the ratio of Pleiades than any other star set. And I said, there has to be somebody there. In fact, in 1968, when I was growing up in the Bay Area in Berkeley, California, where my dad was getting his PhD in psychology, I was 7 years old, on the way home from elementary school, and everybody was going crazy over this flying saucer down really low. I mean, you couldn't miss this thing. It was total pandemonium. And I watched it for 20 minutes, and it just blinked out. It didn't travel super fast like a sudden thruster engine. It just simply went into another dimension. Instantly, it was gone. And this was metallic. The color of the metal I can still remember at this age is very unique. It's something like bismuth or mercury. It's a color that you don't see in metal today very easily. It's possibly a little bit of aluminum in there, but it had no markings on it. In the following days, I was paralyzed in my sleep, and I met these 8-foot-tall humans, not grays, with the big eyes. They were literally physically like us, but much taller. And they told me they didn't name the star Pleiades. They just showed it to me. And I'd never seen it. I'd never, looked through telescopes at that age, so I'd never seen it. But they told me how their craft worked, their technology, that they were interested in what humans were doing. But I was only 7 years old, and my mom had just divorced my real father, Lynn Sarita, and married a science teacher who just got out of the military, David Cooper. So I was, in the following, going to get very scientifically oriented. So I had a connection with that star system. I'd never had any other experiences with them since. And there are some phenomenal things in the Great Pyramid, too, that connect it to Jesus' birth. Very, very clearly. There's one that's very well known as the Bethlehem angle. Is an angle that when the pyramid is, the north-facing side of the pyramid at 26.3 degrees, it runs right through the city of Bethlehem. So they call it the Jesus or the Christ angle coming out of the pyramid because it seems to be predicting the birth of the Messiah. So I was very interested in the star system. And I figured out all the codes, and I built a very unique transmitter. It's not like the wand that people see on YouTube at my Spaceman 99 channel. It's transmitting all the pyramid frequencies. It's way more sophisticated than that. And I did, the first time I transmitted was 3 years ago on August 21st on my birthday, and I sent my wife's song where she's singing "Fly Me to the Moon," the Frank Sinatra song. She's a beautiful jazz singer. And I didn't know if it would really work. I was like, this would be interesting to see, because it's the same concept of giant crystal oscillators built in the ratio of star systems, with another very, very important piece of technology on the inside of the pyramids that is not very well known. Because you need a power source, you need some form of electricity to transmit a charge to the pyramid stone to cause the electrons to start oscillating within the geometries of the pyramid. And they start spinning up the cone-like structure, the square cone, and the waves get very compressed at the top, and that's why you see that big beam of light shooting out of the top of the pyramid in that guy's iPhone photograph. And I know that is a real photograph because you see the lightning strike, which means the Earth is being charged with high voltage electricity, and the oscillations have to go somewhere, and they go, they oscillate up the apex of the pyramid, and you don't see. Some people thought that photograph was horizontal lines, which is something that the scan line system in digital cameras does, but it actually is not that, because if it was one of the horizontal lines, it would go right in front of the pyramid. It starts right at the apex, right at the top. So I transmitted to Pleiades that night the jazz song, and in the middle of the night I hear a clear man's voice. It's not in my head. It's not like my mind intuiting a voice. It was an audible voice. It said, "Congratulations, we received your message. Now what do you want to ask us?" And I jumped out of bed, and I went, "Oh my God, it works. The technology works." And I started writing down all my questions to them, recorded them on Pro Tools with a good microphone, and I transmitted them when Pleiades were rising on the eastern horizon on just near the end of August 21st, my birthday that year. And first night, nothing happened. The second night, it was massive, the experience that happened. There was a UFO right over our house, and they were, oh my, I don't really want to go into that story yet, because I actually have all that on a CD at the voiceentertainment.net website, but that's not what I want to talk about, because what I want to talk about is the most recent transmission I did. I built an even more powerful magnetic field on my Pleiadian transmitter, and this past August, which is about the fourth or fifth time I've transmitted to them, I asked a question about the pocket knife disappearing in the guy's pyramid house when he was building the frame. And I said, could the pyramids have been used to physically teleport a person to another dimension of Earth or another star system? That was one of the many questions I asked them. And I addressed the Pleiadian Council with no imagery in my mind of who that was. That night, the night of my birthday, my 51st birthday, Anubis, the god of the underworld, the dog god, the brother of Isis, her sister Nephthys gave birth to, so it's like a cousin to Isis, to this god who becomes the god of the underworld in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the one who brings souls on a boat to the Pleiades star system, is Anubis. And he's a dog, and he has this big, beautiful collar around his neck, and he's moving around very freely on all fours, and he gets into this throne inside of the Great Pyramid, all made in gold. And he tells me there's giant tsunamis coming, and this was over 10,000 years ago, probably. He didn't give me the date. It was the last great epoch. And he said it happened so fast that not all of them could use the pyramids to get out of Earth. And we went through a wormhole. He turned the pyramid on, and it went through a wormhole, and we were in another planet. We actually went to, I saw 3 planets we were approaching, and then we were on the ground, and he showed me that the pyramids, basically the world was enveloped by tsunamis, massive flooding. Their entire civilization died. There were only some of them that made it out of there. This is what he told me. This is just last August. And that when the new people of the Middle East in that part of the world, what is now Egypt, discovered the pyramids, they were still working so they could come to and from and visit them. And that is why temples of Isis and Osiris, her husband, and Nephthys, actually they had found temples in Turkey of Isis that predate even the first dynasty. So by the time Moses came on the scene in about 1300 BC, the last epoch of the end of the previous civilization was already thousands of years old. And those deities were so old that the current pharaoh in 1300 BC that Moses was battling over the issue of his god knew nothing about the ancient Egyptians. And if anybody knew, because Moses was raised in Egypt and studied mysticism, it was Moses who really knew who the real deities were. And the pharaohs, the current pharaohs, were not at all aware of who the real masters of the ancient technology and the ancient civilization were, and nor how that technology worked. And it's amazing because, Robert Temple wrote a new book on the Sphinx, and I just got it. I got it after my experience with Anubis. And he proves to you the Sphinx has the body of a dog. In fact, only yesterday I discovered on the internet that in Tutankhamun's tomb they found a ark, just like the Ark of the Covenant, almost the same dimensions with the long poles. But Anubis, the dog, is sitting on top of it. And they even thought it might have been the real Ark of the Covenant because the dimensions were so close to the dimensions that Moses had for the Ark of the Covenant. And if you look at the hindquarters of the dog on the Ark of Anubis, you can Google it. There's some good photos from some museum tours that is done. And then you look at the hindquarters on the Sphinx, you'll realize it's the same animal. It's not a lion. And in fact, what Robert Temple in his The Sphinx Mystery book proves is the pharaohs of the dynastic period carved off the head of Anubis and put on the face of Pharaoh on the Sphinx. So, and its case is so inarguable. There's no doubt that the Pharaoh put his face on the Sphinx. That is not a lion's body. That is a dog's body, and the Sphinx really belonged to Anubis. But because thousands and thousands of years had passed, the new image that the pharaohs wanted to put for the gods were the faces of the pharaohs. And then he also proves in his book that the pyramids date way before Cheops or Khephren, same king. It was not his tomb. In fact, there are no inscriptions anywhere inside of the pyramid, no hieroglyphs, no nothing. All of that came later. So everything Anubis showed me in person on the astral plane as in response to my question was, one, yes, it was like Star Trek technology. You could open up a wormhole and you didn't need a spaceship and you could move a person to another planet in another star system, just like that. Just like that.
Were they concerned at all about you catching on to this type of technology? Because, we do have a lot of evil on this planet that they might not want to have that.
Oh, see, that's a great question, and it's a very intimidating question because whoever figures this out, the pyramids don't work anymore technologically. The Muslims in the, after Muhammad and King Suleiman, they basically took all of the limestone casing on the outer part of the pyramid, and I think there was gold cabling that went for the coil, the power source to ionize the pyramids that went all the way up the square base, and that's why they stripped the limestone off to get all the gold, because Egypt was full of gold, and gold is the best conductor to build a crystal oscillator with. So I think even if it didn't have the gold, you could still get the oscillations to work. But right now, you would have to do some serious modifications to get it to turn on again. And in fact, if you Google Dendera light, all these people thought this giant tube with a coil inside of it was a light bulb. But if you Google on Wikipedia and you see the photos of Dendera light in Egypt, you'll see these 8-foot-tall gods, which are about the size of the beings that have appeared to me many times, actually, as a consequence of my transmissions. they have these little humans underneath the giant supposed light bulb, and you see a coil with a wire going into it. And everyone thought that was a light bulb, and I thought, you can't stand that close to a light bulb that big. It would blind you. That is not a light bulb, and if you look at the coil inside of it, that's not a filament. No filament there. That is a transmitter coil, just like the wands that I've developed. And now we sell the wands and the pendants at the lightstreamtechnologies.com. So if anybody wants one, you can get one. It's this. My wand is the same thing as the Dendera light. That thing, that giant tube with the coil in it, is the transmitter that you need to start the activation of the electrons in the limestone and the granite core to get them going. Now, this is where it gets mind-blowing. The proof that I'm going to present now, there are two experiments done at major universities where scientists got signals to go many times faster than the speed of light. The first one was done at Berkeley by a physicist named Raymond Chow, and he was doing this in the late 80s, early 90s. And I phoned him because I used to work for major nuclear physicists on nuclear fusion and landmine and bomb detection. So I knew how to talk to these guys, and I've studied physics, so I know the language. I called Raymond Chow. What he did, this was in Discover magazine, by the way, he used a crystal down converter light source and split two pathways of light off of mirrors and sent one pathway through of like a quartz, thin sheet of silica, which is quartz. And the other one went through ordinary space. And the one that went to quartz went 1.7 times the speed of light in the beginning. He eventually got up to over 35 times the speed of light. And I thought, Raymond, I said, he told me on the phone, he doesn't know why it's happening. All he knows is the crystal is causing the light signal to go faster than light speed, but it's acting as a barrier, so why is it working? So I told him why it was working, and I said, well, look at the crystal lattice geometry of silica. What is silica made of? Silica, see, everything on the periodic table is made up of atoms that join together in geometrical shapes. And the geometrical shapes can determine some of the hidden properties of materials, which is what solid-state physics is all about. And it turns out silica is a three-sided pyramid. And when a wave approaches the three-sided pyramid, it doesn't matter which side it approaches, it compresses towards the top of the triangle, and the wavelength gets smaller, and therefore it can quantum tunnel and go faster than light. And that's exactly what happened. You can Google quantum tunneling, and you'll see that pyramidal geometries force, remember that guy's photograph of the beam of light shooting out of the top of the pyramid? That's the compression point where the signal goes faster than light. That's it. Then, in all the major news media, at Princeton University, at the NEC Princeton lab, this Chinese-American scientist, Li-Jun Wang, he sends us a crystal light source through cesium gas, which is radioactive, and it goes 300 times the speed of light. So I said, okay, what's the crystal lattice geometry of cesium chloride gas? And it's four-sided pyramids, 6 four-sided pyramids all stuck together. And I went, oh my God, this is on a microscopic scale. He's using pyramids to send the signal 300 times the speed of light. So it's so obvious that my theory is correct, that the Great Pyramids were designed with multi-layered materials, just like transistors are, to get electrons to move from one place to another. You have to use different materials. Like, for example, in a car battery, you have to have an anode and a cathode. Your positive and negative poles have to be made out of, one is zinc and one is copper. And the reason you use different types of metals is you have to set up a difference. Difference means an imbalance to cause electrons to go from one place to another, to start moving. And the pyramids had difference because they had different materials, but when the electrons start moving, as soon as you stimulate them with the power source, the wand, then they compress at the peak, and they're all in the ratio of a star system, and boom, your signal is going many times faster than the speed of light, and you're able to communicate and possibly even send people. That's what Anubis showed me. They were able to move people into through the pyramid technology to another place.
I'm wondering if maybe they use this type of technology to get their crafts here. I mean, because everybody, has these UFO sightings. I've had some myself. I've talked with Andrew Bishago, who says that he was in some program where they teleported. And, I know it sounds crazy, but, maybe that's the type of technology that was being used.
Well, I think you're dead on. I mean, the UFO I saw in Berkeley, it didn't accelerate. It just disappeared in a blink of an eye. And, Patrick Flanagan wrote a very famous book called Pyramid Power, and I bought an outdated copy of it. And he has these little, a figure 23 in the book. It shows these little metal pyramids, and they charge the pyramids, and cones of light go shooting out of the top. And it's just, and I put it side by side with the Chichen Itza pyramid photo from the guy's iPhone, and you just see it's the same. It's not an artifact of the guy's camera. It's teleportation. These things have a very, very powerful purpose to open up stargates. In fact, what's really strange is the experiment that the Chinese-American physicist Li Wang did, and you can Google that. There's no more information on it. If you can send signals 300 times the speed of light, I'm sorry, we're already sending signals to other star systems. And I'm doing it a different way. I'm able to do it with a crystal oscillator magnetic field transmitter, but you always have to include consciousness, a living system, to trigger the faster than light signal. But they're getting to the point now, even at Cambridge University in England, physicists quantum-entangled 2 diamonds, and which are amazing. Diamonds are made of carbon, and carbon is probably going to rule the semiconductor world in the very near future. It's completely outdoing silicon. And they separated the diamonds over a great distance, and they communicate faster than light with each other. They can signal the one and the other responds at a distance faster than light. So that means the door is open now to the cosmos. We're no longer going to be using radio waves and radio wave receivers like SETI's using to communicate and transmit messages around the cosmos, because radio waves are just amazingly slow. Very good for your cell phone, but not good to talk to, anything outside of the solar system.
Right,
that's where it's all going,
right.
and it's all of it is crystal-based technology. It's all crystal-based technology.
Hey, David, if you don't mind, let's take a call. We have a couple callers on the line,
sure.
And then I'd like to come back and talk some more. I definitely have some questions. Frankie in North Carolina, you are on Late Night in the Midlands.
Oh, Michael, hello, David.
Hi.
Hello.
David, you have a lot of interesting topics that you hit throughout the show, and I've actually been reading a lot of different things on the internet and watching a lot of documentaries that actually hit the topics you're mentioning, and I just wanted to throw some ideas at you, see what you thought.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, the one film I watched, it talked about pyramids being built slowly from another dimension, and with the thoughts of the people, they could place the blocks from another dimension into the position they are in now, so they can be aligned up precisely with the stars. What do you think of that?
Mm-hmm. I've never seen anything about that myself, how that would be possible to do it slowly from another dimension. I mean, ultimately, yes. I mean, especially semiconductors, which is what stone is there are different types of semiconductive material. Once you vibrate it up to the point that it turns into light, you can move it around and place it. That makes sense. If you look at the wave compression at the apex of the pyramid, at that point, if you were physically inside of it, and all the electrons were moving in the semiconductor, your body would probably turn into light. And wouldn't be physical anymore. You know, when they're actually turned on. I don't think they've been turned on for thousands of years. So yeah, you could move a block, you could move anything. You know, anywhere.
And I was thinking about you talking about a lot about crystals. There's one video I saw that talked about the crystal that goes on top of the pyramid. The big pyramid shape is supposedly underneath the Sphinx. And this crystal actually has the blueprint to the pyramid, shows all the temple, all the paths and everything, and that's actually, they believe, to be the power source to the pyramids. And once this pyramid is on, it's used to unite everyone's consciousness together. What do you think of that?
Well,
Hear anything about that?
It sounds like a very interesting, you know, and very plausible idea, because crystals have memory. We can store, we know now because they did it at Stanford University, they stored, you know, 2 separate movie files, one of the Mona Lisa and one of a hummingbird, in a crystal. And they can retrieve it. And, you know, that was back in the 90s. They're way ahead of that now. But now they're even storing information in viruses. I mean, they're storing it in all kinds of viruses. They're storing a terabyte, you know. So it turns out even DNA has memory. There's one university, I saw this, it was a major university, Princeton or something like that, where they're storing over a terabyte in a milligram of human DNA. So our DNA is writable, and crystal is writable and retrievable, and because it's an amazing, amazing semiconductor. So with semiconductors, the electrons float on the surface, and they not only carry charge, but they can carry and transfer information. It's even possible to, if you're a very advanced meditator, to touch a crystal that has holograms stored in it, and you would see them very clearly in your third eye. They would assemble the imagery just like a TV screen does, which is a liquid crystal display. You know, some of the different types of you know, displays now. It's all making sense that the human organism has all of the same things. Like our bones are calcium, phosphorus, and silica. Well, the first transistors were silica and phosphorus. Same thing in our bones. And calcium, which is the majority of the bone, is an electrolyte. It's a good semiconductor. So then you have a liquid crystal, which is minerals and blood plasma floating around our solid-state crystal. We have everything we need. Something happened to our DNA and to our chakras, which correspond to glandular systems in the body. And the glands store, you know, everything from crystal material to minerals. Something happened where most of the people I've tested, they have critically low body voltage. I mean, they're really low, and especially people who suffer from depression, they have amazingly low body voltages. And with those people connecting with, I mean, we even had people at the UFO conventions buy one of our pendants and go to the aura camera booth, and they would do before and after pictures with their pendant, and you could see a huge difference in the aura. So it means the aura is transmitting better signals. But my point is, something happened. We don't have enough power going into our very weak circuitry, you know, which is our glands and chakra system, for many of us to be very, very psychic or to open up to more mystical states of consciousness. So there's an advantage when you can do this. I mean, and there are yogis in India who believe that gems are the highest medicine that the body, if you know how to get the gem to work with the body, they would all say that it has to touch the skin and it's true. I mean, when, you know, we work with charged gems, when they touch the skin, there is a change in the energy field. So crystals are enormously powerful. The crystal skulls could easily have holograms, the real ones, which are probably really rare, holographic memory that has been stored in them.
Yeah, I would love it if we can get the information, if any, that's stored in these crystal skulls. That would be absolutely amazing. Who knows what we would actually find out.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, can I ask one more thing before I hang up?
Sure.
Okay. David, I've been going back to something you said earlier about the statues, the different sizes of the people and everything. I was watching some stuff on YouTube talking about people's size vary based on dimensions, and they were wondering if people were able to meditate and see things from a different dimension, that they saw people at different sizes, so they were making statues of actual size of people. Do you think of that? I'll go offline. Thank you.
Well, I mean,
Thank you.
I've been meditating every day for 30 years, and I've had direct encounters with Christ 3 times, and to me, he's still the most powerful being this side of the universe. I've met a lot of beings that I've seen with my eyes wide open, full 3-dimensional beings. I've never seen anyone who compares to him, and by even there's not even a contender who's even close. But nevertheless, that's my experience. There still are a lot of other wonderful beings in the universe that are nonviolent that we can befriend and learn from. And as far as seeing them, like when I see them, they're usually the correct sizes. Like anybody who died that I personally knew, they would appear in their correct size in the astral holographic body that I see with my eyes open. I didn't get a mental picture. I see them perfectly clearly, and have telepathed with them and had many experiences. I haven't seen, actually, my daughter before she was born was the brightest aura of any human spirit I've ever seen, and she's the last spirit I've ever seen with my eyes open. But there are times, even recently after my Pleiades transmissions, where I'm in the half-in out state. I'm almost asleep, but I'm not dreaming, and all of a sudden there were 3 tall Pleiadian beings of light standing at the foot of my bed in the bedroom, and I couldn't see faces because there was too much light, but they were there, but I could only see them with my eyes closed, which is very interesting. It's not a mental picture. They're fully visible. It's like I could even see my whole room with my eyes closed. But when I opened my eyes, I didn't see them. My wife, for the first time one night recently, we both jumped out of bed because I saw one of them with my eyes closed, and she jumped up, and she saw for the first time in her life, with her eyes open, a full 3-dimensional hologram right in front of her. And she'd never actually seen anything in her life, and she always told me, if I ever saw a ghost like you do, it would scare me too much. So what they showed her was a little childlike stick man that was getting on a bicycle and pedaling, so it was really harmless. And it was so elementary that it didn't scare her, because they were being really gentle with her and showing her, look, we're probably going to ease her into this, very, very slowly.
Amazing. All right, I have a question that was emailed to me here, and then we'll take the next call. It says, ask David about alien technology and his involvement with building a craft. It also adds a great job having you on the show. So,
Well, I've lectured at UFO conferences that I was shown as a kid, 7-year-old, how the craft work, and over the years in studying physics for, a very long time now, I believe I have a good shot at building an anti-gravity device, but I've never raised the money to really do it right, and I don't really want to build it with a lack of funding, because I know it's not going to work. But with the number of pendants that we've sold so far, I've been able to fund and develop these transmitter wands that we now sell. They're $1,800, and they have 6 rubies in them and tourmaline crystal oscillator core, and they come with all the harmonic codes that are all labeled at the lightstreamtechnologies.com site. But anyway, I've been able to do that technology, and I've been able to really advance my star code, the mathematics on different star codes. I've had people email me who say, I had experiences with the, particular constellations when they were kids. I'm getting all these people who as children, remember star beings appearing to them from specific constellations, and they want me to do the star codes for their constellation. And I'm like, wow, I mean, you have no idea how long it takes me just to do all the codes for, if there's 3 stars, there's several hundred frequencies involved. So when you when you're doing that, it takes a long time to open up and get all the codes and all the signals generated. And for stars, the signals are inaudible. You can't hear them. And then you transmit it through the device, and you start experimenting and seeing if anybody in that star system can see your signal, your digital. Remember, your photons are luminous. They emanate off the body in all the color spectrums, including the invisible color spectrum, according to physicist Fritz Albert Popp, P-O-P-P. You can Google his name. And so that means there's a digital self of you that appears in that star system. And if somebody sees it, they may or may not choose to communicate with you. I mean, I even had recently, after a transmission to Pleiades, a lucid dream. This is how it happens. Even the prophet Enoch had all of his visions in the dream state. He states that in the beginning of the book of Enoch. I saw this young girl, looked 14 years old, with dark hair, and her skin, she was translucent. She had all these little lights, like atomic energy, zipping around inside her body, rainbow colors. And she looked at me, and she had 2 vials of this water with all the colors zipping around in the water sitting on the table. And she told me that she's not appearing to me in her form as she appears in the Pleiades. She said that we might not be ready for it. Possibly because they're so much taller than me. And she said that because I asked the question, could you have your craft appear right over our house in the full visible spectrum? And they had already answered me years before and said that when they materialize their craft, our military picks them up on radar, and we've been using very advanced beam weapons on them, against them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have full proof that the Space Shuttle Columbia was shot down by such a beam weapon, and we can even go there later if you want, because there's a war going on with these crafts. So they told me that, yes, we have the Palladian craft. It's too dangerous for us to materialize in the United States airspace because of these very advanced beam weapons we possess. But she said we were scouting many years ago in the star system Spica, and I never heard of Spica. She just said Spica. And we found a super water there that we started drinking, and our bodies were able to turn into pure light very easily, and we can move around the universe, and we don't need spaceships anymore. She said we still use them because they're comfortable, like having your house spaceship, like your Winnebago when you go camping. But she said we don't need them anymore, and it's safer for us because they can just physically materialize anywhere they want to leave. Well, this is really interesting because we distribute a movie called Water, the Great Mystery at the voiceentertainment.net site that was produced in Russia, and you can see these scientists with these very sophisticated measuring tools. They're measuring the energy levels of tap water, restructured water, and water in different springs and waterfalls in nature. And you can see the energy curves on all the different types of water. And they found water in the Amazon coming off of this waterfall it's actually in Venezuela, where they have more waterfalls than anywhere in the world practically. Though the energy in that water was so high that they basically said there's no water like it on Earth. It's like super water. And the people who drink it live very long lives and don't get cancer. So that was proof enough that there are different energy levels of water. And what this Palladian girl was telling me is the water from Spica is so supercharged that it has all these little light balls zipping around in it. And when you drink it, because humans are mostly water, and we are electrical, and it is the water and the minerals and the silica in our water that makes us more electrical, they can raise their body voltages to such high frequencies that they can dematerialize and move around. And I thought, that's fascinating because there's a lot of proof. In fact, even in ancient India, and not even so ancient India, there are yogis that reportedly can convert their bodies into plasma balls of light and go shooting off into space. There are people who have seen the Mahavatar Babaji and Jesus Christ do that in front of their eyes in India within the last 100 years. So that's
sounds like the fountain of youth.
Exactly, that is the fountain of youth. And if you look at the end of Revelation, it talks about this water that if you partake of it, it rejuvenates you. See, so we're really getting, through these transmissions. Like, I've been meditating every day for 30 years, and I can tell you that even though I can go into this bliss state and this cosmic state, to specifically target a star system and get a response and have beings appear to you on the astral plane in regards to your question, I can't do that with meditation alone. I might have to ask questions, like in India, you would, if you wanted to communicate with a particular deity, like in the ancient Vedic Indian system, there's a god for Pleiades, and his name is Kritikaya. You would have to say, the equivalent of hymns or songs or mantras to Kritikaya, million mantras before he'll appear to you. Because sound waves take, years and years and years of repetition to really go deeply into your DNA to harmonize you with that deity. But with pyramid technology or crystal oscillator technology like I have, I can do that way faster. I can get millions of wavelets with that star system to go into your DNA in a matter of minutes, and help you have an experience with particular star groups. I mean, there are probably star systems where there's nobody in the physical state in those systems. They're probably just light bodies living in certain star systems because those stars are too hot and they're too not able to sustain the temperature is a really interesting issue. Did you have time for the temperature, or is there another?
Yeah. Well, excuse me. I thought maybe we'd take this call, and we have a break coming up in about 10 minutes. So we'll get through this call, and then we can get into temperature for sure. And and I also want to kind of worm around the idea that maybe these life forms, these UFOs that we see now, I mean, maybe perhaps it could be, maybe we left this planet a long time ago and it's us coming back. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit. I wonder if they had found technologies on the moon and maybe reverse engineered it. But we'll get into that. I'm rambling on here. Let's get Thomas in California. Thomas, you're on Late Night in the Midlands.
Yeah, how you doing? Great to speak
All right,
to you guys.
How are you?
Thank you. Mr. Sereda, I'm really honored to talk to you. I found out about you a couple interviews ago. You were talking to an engineer from Rockwell, I believe, and
from Lockheed.
Lockheed, that's right. Okay, and you just had a great interview with him, and it was fascinating. I used to work at Hughes, and some of those old-time engineers are just incredible, but they were nowhere close to his caliber. My question was, have you ever heard of the group called Galactic Federation of Light?
Well, yeah.
Would you give them any credence or credibility?
There are people out there that are purely channeling information, and usually the channel that method of getting contacted can be valid. I mean, there are three ways we can perceive extended contact with, beyond Earth beings. One is full three-dimensionally with your eyes open. The other is on the astral plane behind sleep. And the other is very telepathic, but the telepathic one, it's really hard to be out of the way, to get the ego removed, and just listen to messages that are coming through the telepathic medium. And when you understand now that physicists are recognizing that DNA is an antenna and can receive an electromagnetic transmission, and it can transmit in the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the speed of light. It's not faster than light. And Fritz Albert Popp is saying DNA transmits faster than light. then you're starting to see mainstream science admit that telepathy is possible, because your DNA is a transmitter receiver, a coil. It is a coil.
Right.
But the noise of civilization and the noise of random thought is so loud that a meditator, to be so silent and so perfect in their meditation, to not get massive distortion of a channeled or telepathic message.
Or their ego. Their ego.
Or their ego. And a lot of these people have huge egos, and I've met some of them. I'm not going to name them. And I just don't believe when I see egos that big that most of what they're telling you is probably not accurate.
Right. Well,
most
that's
of it.
What I was wondering. I need to ask you one other thing. I'm very disabled. I'm quadriplegic, and I've had my left hand was amputated a couple years ago, and along with most of my right. And I've been trying to do meditation and do astral projection. Really difficult, and
it's very
but
difficult.
the meditation, and the meditation is the key. And I was wondering if there's any way to really get better at it. Any types of techniques I could use to be better at meditating? Would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, one, I have meditation lessons at my voiceentertainment.net website, and one of them is deep relaxation. And the secret to meditation is less about concentrating on when the Western mind concentrates, it tends to tensen up and focus its consciousness on a small area, because it's trying to be one-pointed or trying to stop thinking, and that doesn't really work very well. The relaxation, most of meditation is about letting go and relaxing. And I had a guy who was a recovering war veteran from the Iraq Gulf Wars, and he had post-traumatic, and he started doing my deep relaxation meditation. He got off his medication because he said it's the only thing that healed him. But then he said, this was 3 days before Benazir Bhutto's assassination. He said, I don't know why. I wasn't thinking about Benazir Bhutto, but I go into this deep relaxation state on your CD, and I can see her washing her feet in a silver bowl, going up to give a speech, and a suicide bomber blows up and kills her. I took his email, and I sent it to everybody I knew in news media, including some people at Fox News. Nobody believed the guy's story. 3 days later, she was assassinated.
So, that was terrible.
Yeah, my point is that the meditation approach to we normally learn from the idea of stopping the mind is you can't stop the mind with the mind. But the deeper you can relax and let go, a deep process of letting go, there's a point where you're so relaxed that you disengage from the physical limitation of the body, and you can really, really go deep. Another tool, I have some friends that are good brainwave mappers, and my father's a PhD in psychology at Berkeley. They found that if you could meditate with an interface of brainwave mapping, and you could see all of your brainwaves, we're producing all of them, from very, very low deltas to thetas to alphas to the beta and higher. You can get some gammas. You can, as you're meditating, you can hear sounds that are telling you when you're in theta, when you're in delta. And as an interface, the out-of-body stuff happens at deep delta. I had my brainwaves mapped in the spring, and I had massive thetas and deltas, which are really, really altered states of consciousness, because the brain is ultra slow in delta. In fact, my deltas went all the way past the end of the meter. That's where you can disengage from the body. But the point of having an interface with the sound tones going in your ear is you go, that technique is causing me to increase my deltas or my thetas. Oh, this technique is making my alphas, which is my coherency. Oh, this technique is making me produce gammas. And so then what they found with these interfaces is people were learning how to meditate way faster because they were getting feedback on what... Because if, let's say, you only produce a little bit of delta, and and you go, well, I don't really know what I'm feeling yet because I'm very new at meditating. You need to stay in delta or theta for a long time, at least 20 minutes before something really mystical can happen.
I gotcha. What is your website, if I could get to it?
Well, the meditation CDs are at the voiceentertainment.net website, and also I wanted to tell you this because the very first person I built one of these transmitting magnetic wave transmitters, and there's no microwaves in the transmitter at all, so it can't harm you. It's only the microwaves that are dangerous. We had a little girl, 3-year-old, who fell off a dryer, broke her shoulder, and the mom, gave up on the doctors because they couldn't, get the little girl's arm to move again. And they bought one of my transmitters, and they were transmitting the NASA sound of the sun through a magnetic wave with a magnet strapped to her arms. And in 3 months, she's moving her arm again for the first time in over a year and a half.
That's incredible.
So, really incredible, because the nerves are electrical, and you're able to stimulate them with harmonic pulse magnetic waves as opposed to just regular. There are these things called pulse magnetic massagers, but the pulses are not harmonic. They're just vibrating pulses for the sake of pulses, and that's not really anything. So there's a possibility. I mean, I can only say I have one case where a person had no ability to move a limb and they recovered. So and I do have a Harvard medical doctor who's going to do some trials on these transmitters for healing, because we also notice with our dog in our bedroom, she gets into these itching fits. She's 12 years old with the bacteria, and we transmit the pyramid frequencies, and she stops itching in 10 minutes and goes to sleep. Well, this is interesting because Patrick Flanagan, who wrote Pyramid Power, he made cardboard pyramids, lined them to magnetic north, put a dead rat inside of the paper pyramid and a dead rat on the outside. And he watched as the days went by, the rat on the outside got maggots, and the one in the pyramid, no bacteria could exist there. Nothing.
That's incredible.
And it mummified perfectly where the other one was full of maggots and bacteria. So some of these bacterial infections that people are getting might receive benefits. I mean, this is experimental, from pyramid frequencies.
That's amazing. We're coming up on a break here, Thomas, but was there anything else?
Okay, thank you guys very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Good luck, Thomas.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, good luck, and God bless.
Right.
And David, before we take this break, I seen an article the other day. I actually read it off here on the program 2 days ago, where the government, they got scientists who are working on not only building super soldiers, but getting it working on ways for soldiers to grow back limbs that they lost in war. And who knows, maybe this could be done with frequency technology.
Wow.
Very interesting. Yeah, well, hang on for a moment, David. We're going to get this break out of the way, and then we'll come back and talk some more. I definitely want to hear about these temperatures, so we'll get into that when we return. Everybody, if you got a question or a comment, 347-989-1012. Just press 1 so we know you want on the air. Please get over to LateNightInTheMidlands.com, become a member, and be informed. And by all means, inform others. I'm Michael Vera. This is Late Night in the Midlands. David Sarita is my guest, and we will be right back.
Is there proof of God's existence in our government's records? Author Jose Colazo.
Oh, hey, we're down to we're just under an hour tonight. We've got David Sarita with us, and we're talking about pyramid power. We're talking about sending signals light years away, faster than the speed of light, communication, contact, if you will. LateNightInTheMidlands.com. Go on over, become a member, be informed, inform others. You can listen live on the website. We have a chat room there, a lot of great, intelligent people who join that chat room. No hassle. It's just all, it's like a family in there. So feel free to come over to LateNightInTheMidlands.com and join that family. And spread our content, please. It does help us grow. It helps us tremendously. And while you're at it, if you have it in your means and you can donate, that's how we keep these programs, this network, up and running. We do it through the support of our listeners and a little bit of sponsorship that we get. So, it's not free. It costs us money to do this, but we do it because we know it's the right thing to do. We don't want corporations getting involved. We don't want control. We want to be free to cover and say what we need to say, cover what we need to cover, and that's how we do it, with your help. And, hey, if you want to get the player and embed it on your website, you can do that as well. I guess the best way is to go over to the Blog Talk Radio show page that we have, and the link is over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com. Just click it. You can embed it there. If you want the embedded player, that's over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com. You can email me at LateNightInTheMidlands@yahoo.com, and I can send you the code. Trying to get this. We've got it on quite a few sites as it is, and I do appreciate everybody who's spreading the word and helping us grow. I really do. So thank you so much, everyone. Let's get back to it. 347-989-1012. That is the number to call. And by the way, tomorrow night, Dr. Michael Nuccitelli joins me, and we will be discussing a part 2 of evil in cyberspace. So should be interesting. And at the end of this week on Friday, I have psychic Helene Olson joining me here, and we'll take calls. So but right now it's David Sarita. And David, let's hear about those temperatures.
I'm back. We are back.
All right. Yes, we are. Temperatures you were going to get into.
Well, see, temperature is the number one reason why NASA can't find any other intelligent life in the universe, is because you have to have a habitable zone that is the right temperature for a human body, because, we think of human bodies and mammals and animals, to survive without burning up, without being too cold, just right. And temperature is very similar to voltage in that voltage means difference. For example, if you have a electromagnetic radiation, which is what sunlight is, at a very high frequency, the higher the frequency of the light, the higher the temperature. But that's only because what it's striking is low frequency. So when something's a low frequency, like our brain is producing 30, 40 waves a second in the daytime, and it gets hit by something that's, quadrillions of waves a second, higher than that because the infrared is around a quadrillion waves, then there's a huge difference in frequency, and that difference causes temperature or causes heat. But if you have a being whose vibratory rate is really high frequency, when a high frequency wave from a star or sun hits them, they don't experience burning up or overheating, because they're already high frequency beings. So that's the number one reason that NASA can't find what are known as habitable zones around stars. They believe there's one around Alpha Centauri, that there's 3 stars there, and there's one that they believe could have a similar temperature that Earth has, and there could be a zone where there's a planet like Earth. And there are probably Earth-like planets where there are bodies that are very low-frequency bodies like ours that wouldn't melt or freeze to death in the right habitable zone. But NASA's really limited themselves on the temperature issue because they don't understand that temperature is different. And they don't understand that our skin is a membrane. Our skin is held together on our bodies because of external atmospheric pressure, weight, pushing on the skin. I mean, I used to do high-altitude skydiving from 30,000 feet, and when you go up really high, the pressure really gets low, and you can actually have all the cells in your body explode if you get too high without a pressure suit on, right? So you need false pressure in high altitudes to keep the skin on the body. The point is the skin is a membrane that is a point between external pressure pushing out from the body and external pressure pushing in against the skin. And that equilibrium is the membrane center, which is the skin. And membranes in cells, for example, if you look on the cellular level, a human cell If it's in a low voltage state, more radiation will penetrate the cell and damage the DNA in the center and cause cancer. That's what nuclear radiation does. High voltage cell doesn't let in as much radiation. It has more pressure to resist it. You see what I'm saying? So if you become a higher voltage or higher frequency oscillating cell organism, your membrane doesn't get affected by temperature as much. And that's how these very well documented miracles of Catholic saints walking into a furnace and they don't get burned. They're wearing the brown scapular robe and they don't get burned. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, when we dropped the atomic bombs on them in 1945, there was this Catholic church in the ground zero area, and there are stories of the monks wearing the robes. No burns, no radiation, nothing, and everything around them was scorched. And the point is that when in deep mystical states, not only does consciousness accelerate, but the physical cells in the body of the saint can get into such high frequency states that there's no difference, so therefore they don't burn. And they can walk into fire. They can walk on fire. Like, I've done fire walking, and so is my wife, where you walk barefoot on the hot coals and you think your feet are going to burn. I mean, there really is something to it.
I can't even walk on rocks. If I'm walking on one of those beaches that have little stones.
Oh, yeah, bare feet in the summer, and it's a pretty hard thing to do anywhere. So that's what's happening. Temperature is different. And once you understand that, the door to understanding where extraterrestrials are vibrating at and what their difference is in their relationship to temperature really opens your mind to more habitable zones for different species of extraterrestrials. And so you should be looking in the higher frequency dimensions, especially around stars like Pleiades, because those are blue, very young, relatively young to our sun. They're much younger than our sun is. Hot, because blue light is hotter than orange and yellow light. So they're hotter than ours, and NASA doesn't believe anyone can live there because they're so hot. Well, they're wrong. They're wrong. There are beings there that are vibrating at very, very high rates.
Because they've found organisms of life on this planet in areas that were not supposed to be able to sustain life, and when you talk about habitable zones, I think about Mars, and I think there's enough evidence out there to show that there was something going on there. I mean, we see the face on Mars. There's the pyramids that have been pointed out, and even looks like roads if you look at some pictures. And I know that people do doctor stuff up, but then again, NASA likes to cover a lot of things up as well. So I would wonder if there was once life on Mars, or if maybe these ETs from so far away used Mars as, maybe a base zone or something to come to Earth.
Well, exactly. Very possible. I mean, you look at how even people who live in hot climates like India and the Middle East and Africa, they have more pigment in their skin. Over time, biological life forms are able to adapt, and their DNA gets organized enough to tell that life form that it has to raise its frequency to survive in a particular temperature zone. But the problem is when biological life forms start vibrating at really high frequencies, they're no longer visible to lower frequency vibratory rate beings, and that's why one person, like me, for many years, for 16 years, I could see the dead. I saw Princess Diana the day after she died, and she was the longest lasting ghost I've ever seen in my life, perfectly clearly in broad daylight, sitting right in front of me, and did not leave. When I was waking up in the morning, I kept hiding under the covers because she was still there. What's happening is my cells in my brain has changed its frequency, and I'm able to see a spirit with my physical eyes open with perfect clarity, no blurry fuzziness. Just I can see every fabric, every stitch on their garment they're wearing. And so that, once you realize it's all about frequency and the voltage and the current, the amperage of the cell, that determines, what your range of perception really is. Like I would put my hands right through ghosts. Like when I saw them in the early days, I would just, what had happened is I had my first apparition of Christ. Christ appeared to me in Topanga Canyon in 1994 when I was forced to live in a small tent on my dad's horse ranch. I had nowhere to live, and during a rainstorm, my tent was flooded, and I left my body, and I met Christ blazing like 1,000 suns. He was so bright, and I looked at him, and so much love and so much ecstasy coming from him. He changed my frequency because the next day, within 2 or 3 days, I was seeing the dead. I'm like, what happened? How I met Jesus out of the body, but why is it that in the body I'm seeing people all the time? And in the beginning, I was hiding under the covers, and one time there was like 12 people in my room. And who are they? Why are they all coming to me? And it was then that I realized that he changed the vibratory rate of me and did something to my brain that for almost since 1994 to 2010, I saw them all the time. And it was...
And that's really what goes on with psychics, I think. They just are able to reach a higher vibration. That's why they get the information they get.
Right. It's like you're a radio. You have solid state semiconductor material in your bones, the same stuff we use in transistors, the phosphorus and the silica are in your bones, plus you have the calcium, which is an electrolyte and also a good semiconductor. And therefore you are, and your brain is almost like a liquid crystal display, and what projects into your consciousness, your DNA transmits the information in the light and displays in your consciousness, in your dreams, or right three-dimensionally right in front of you, like it was happening to me. But that is all depends on the frequency of you. You can have a divine, visitation like I did, and it will change your frequency instantly, and suddenly you're seeing the invisible universe. Or you can gradually develop that ability, or you can be born with it. I mean, a lot of our children, we did a film called Hope for Humanity about the new children that are being born with these amazing abilities. And if we don't, when our children report to us, and I'm a new father with a girl who's almost 2 years old, my daughter, and when your children report to you that they're seeing, in this case, my little daughter bonded really well with her great-grandmother, and really well. She spent quite a bit of time, in her last days of life, so she really got to know her. I never got to know my great-grandmother. And when she died on the 27th of August, within days, she's playing in the living room, and she just points up at the ceiling and goes, she's so shocked because she doesn't know. She just saw her grandmother in the hospital. She goes, Grandma, and she says her last name, and she describes what she's wearing to us, and she's just learning how to speak. She's not even 2. So if we tell our children, there's something wrong with you, because you can shut them down so that they will close that ability down. What I'm doing is no projecting. I don't want to encourage it, but when she tells me it, I say, okay, of course I believe you because I've seen it myself. But at the same time, I don't want to feed her imagination. I just want her to tell me exactly what she's seeing, and I'm right there, and we call my wife's mom in, and we all look up, everybody looks up, and they really understand she's really there. And one time my wife was in the bedroom while I was playing with my daughter in the living room recently, and my wife is asking her grandma to come to the house, and she did it silently. She didn't tell us what she was doing, because we're in the other room, and within 15 seconds, my little daughter goes, look, Grandma, and she sees her at the ceiling. So that tells you that you are telepathic, that when you do have a loved one who died, they hear your thoughts like a radio perfectly. The Tibetan Buddhists say that when a relative of yours dies, they hear everything you're saying, everything you're thinking. They hear all of it perfectly.
I believe it. David, I've had enough experiences in my life, and probably is part of the reason I do what I do. But I've had out-of-body experiences. I've lived in a place that had ghost activity, and I had my mother, who passed away in 2001, come to me in 2004. And she came at a time when my life was not going so well. I was pretty down on myself, and she came and she showed me some things, and never spoke, just showed me what I needed to know. It's like I knew what she was saying without her talking, and everything that she said had come true. I mean, so I've had enough experiences that, this stuff don't sound crazy to me, and I totally believe in it. I think one of the problems that we have is from the time a child's born, they're told, well, this is impossible, you can't. People can't do this and can't do that, and they grow up, thinking they can't do it, so they can't do it.
No, that's fine. I mean, didn't that prove to you when your mom appeared to you that there's no question that there's life after death? I mean, didn't that...
Absolutely. She told me straight out, she says, tell your father there is a God. And, that was so powerful to me. And from that day forward, I have absolutely no fear when it's my time. I don't want to go. I have kids, obviously. But when it is my time, at least I know it's not just, hey, throw some dirt on them and it's over. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience is the way I see it.
The way science works is you're in control of your own experiment. If you see the proof that there is spirit and there is life after death, then you don't need anybody else to tell you that it's true or it isn't true, because you've seen the data, you've experienced it.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I know. As soon as I had my daughter, I was like, I don't ever want to die. I don't ever want to leave her. I just want to stay on this planet, over 100 years. So, because I don't want to be separated from her and my wife ever. When I was younger, before I was married, because I got married late in life, I was like, I'm ready to get out of here. I was skydiving and 30,000-foot skydives, jumping out of, doing extreme skiing, anything, because I thought, there's no reason for me to be here. But when I started doing radio shows, my first one with Art Bell in 2000, I realized that all this meditating and all these experiences I had, I needed to share the knowledge and the truth, that to try to encourage people to, whatever their form of religion is, to really get involved in prayer and meditation. It's the greatest, there's nothing greater you can do with your time than to meditate and be sincere in your relationship, to your...
It is medicine for the soul.
Medicine for the soul. The cosmic stuff for me, like using the technology, the pyramids, I mean, I really recognize in myself, for me, that Jesus is, as far as me being a dumb little human, he's God for me. I've never seen anybody even close to him, but I still want to have friends and relationships and learning with beings from other star systems. I'm not afraid that everything out there is evil. I know that Jesus would want us to love everybody as he wanted us to love each other and ourselves, unless we could prove that person meant us harm. Then we wouldn't want to open up to that, particular being or star group that had, malintentions. But I don't, there are Christians out there who believe that everything else is the devil and you can only trust Jesus. And they don't even believe if you saw Jesus that you saw Jesus. They're so afraid. I don't live in...
Oh, I know. And I've dealt with that. As a matter of fact, just recently, everything's the devil. Everything's demons. If psychics are connecting with somebody, it's got to be demonic. If while your dead relative appears to you, it's got to be a demonic force in disguise. Believe me, I've heard it all. And it's just, since when the demons come along and tell you that there is a God, I don't know.
Well, this is, I'll tell you something in the pyramid, that there's a couple of things that will really shock the Judeo-Christian world. And one of them involves the Ark of the Covenant and proves that it belongs in the pyramid. And Moses, as we know, as an infant, was put in a basket and floated down the river, and he was picked up and raised by Egyptians in Egypt. And I believe he was extremely knowledgeable of the original personalities of the ancient Egyptian world, the dynastic Egyptian world, even though he grew up in 1300 years BC with the pharaohs whom I believe were not connected to Isis and Osiris and Anubis and Sekhmet and all the characters that existed from the previous civilization. And when we look at the pyramid, and this is known in Peter Lemaisurier's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, that you have what's called the descending and ascending passage is a 26.3 degree angle that lines up with Pleiades, the central star in Pleiades Alcyone, in 2141 BC. And that on summer solstice. And that is very significant because that passage is showing you that there is a significance to the alignment to that star system for the pyramid on a very mystical day. Well, you take that same 26.3 degrees from the north side of the pyramid and flip it on its side, and it runs right through Bethlehem, which connects Jesus to Pleiades. Now, 26.3 degrees, there's 360 degrees in a circle. If you subtract 20.3 from 360, you're left with 333.7. And Masonic wisdom, the 33 degrees, 33.33 degrees, is the highest mystical number in Masonic wisdom. So, and it also represents the Trinity, the 333. So we're seeing this.
Richard Hoagland uses that number a lot.
Hoagland uses that number a lot, but this number connects Pleiades to Bethlehem because it's the same angle. Now, recently the Gospel of Judas was discovered, and you can Google the Gospel of Judas and read it. And there are some descriptions in the end of the Gospel where Jesus is showing Judas the highest, most holy place in a group or cluster of stars that are in a cloudy kind of star clump. And they describe 6 stars in the Gospel, and Pleiades has been known to be 6 or 7, even though it's actually more than that. But the naked eye, if your eyes are really sharp, you can count 6. And so there's no other star cluster out there that has the cloudiness to it that Pleiades has. And so it's very clear that Jesus is telling Judas about Pleiades. So there's some really strong connection to the birth of Christ in Bethlehem and that star system, once again. Mm-hmm. Now, with the Ark of the Covenant, which goes way back before Jesus' time, Moses' God tells him to build this ark supposedly to put the stone tablets in of the 10 Commandments. And the ark is 2.5 cubits long. Now, this is really amazing because there's so many cubits out there, and you're looking for the perfect Egyptian cubit. And in Peter Lemaisurier's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, the most common measurement in the Great Pyramid is 2 royal cubits, which converts to 41.21 Egyptian primitive inches, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really amazing because the Egyptian primitive inch is, let me see if I have that right. It's 41.21 is 2 cubits in primitive inches. So you take that and you divide it by 2 to get the primitive inches in a single cubit, which is 20.605, and you multiply that by 2.5 cubits long for the Ark of the Covenant, and you get 51.51. That's the slope angle on the Great Pyramid when the limestone casing was on it. It was 51 degrees and 51 minutes. It's the 5151, and Peter Lemaiurier called 5151 the highest number of enlightenment in the Masonic wisdom of the Great Pyramid. It's the most sacred of all numbers. In fact, it's the angle that when the mummies were being prepared at the moment of death, that was the slope angle you wanted to be at when you died. Well, when I was calculating the frequencies of the pyramid as a crystal oscillator, I took the math of the capstone of the Great Pyramid, the top of the capstone. And on the top of the capstone of the Great Pyramid, you have 572.2 primitive inches. on one side. So you got to multiply that by 4 to get your total perimeter around the base of the capstone on the top of the pyramid, and convert it into modern inches, which is almost exactly the same as our inch. I mean, it's 0.00106 difference. And then you calculate the number of standard inches in the speed of light, and you divide it into it to get your frequency. And you get a frequency as a square wave of 5151. Oh my God. The builders of the pyramid would have to know the speed of light to know that they made the base of the capstone the frequency of the 5151. The same number as the slope on the Great Pyramid, and the same number in primitive inches, the true primitive inches, and the length using the proper cubit, royal cubit, of the length of the Ark of the Covenant, which means the Ark of the Covenant belonged in the Great Pyramid, because there's no other place in all stone masonry and wisdom where that number exists. Well, there is an ongoing theory that the Ark of the Covenant did belong in the pyramid, but nobody until this day, until I did the math, could prove that mathematically it had the same code on it as the pyramid. In fact, I could tell you more, but I'm actually working on a movie that's going to include all my discoveries in the Great Pyramid. It's called The Quantum Pyramid.
Nice.
There's so much that I've discovered in the math and the codes of the pyramid that I'm just going to turn the whole world upside down on these ancient religions, because what you're finding is Moses had his people, what we call the Hebrew race, imprisoned by the Pharaoh. And we know now that the pharaohs didn't like the old deities of the ancient Egypt, because they took Anubis's face off of the Sphinx, and that Moses was probably a true Egyptian priest who was doing rituals to the true, most ancient things of pre-dynastic Egypt. And so in Tutankhamun's tomb, they found an ark. And if you Google Egyptian arks, you will find that the Egyptians, and before Moses' time, were using arks with the long poles, and some of them were built with almost the same dimensions as the Ark of the Covenant, incredibly close. But it's very obvious to me that Tutankhamun's artisans did not know the perfection of the math of the 5151, because they just didn't understand it, and they made arks with Anubis on the top of the ark. You can see a picture of it in the front of Tutankhamun's tomb. And there were historians who thought this must be the real Ark of the Covenant, the one, but why is Anubis on the top? And it gets deeper and deeper. I mean, I'm not going to give it all away yet, but I can tell you that what I have, and when I compare the harmonic codes to the ancient religious material, you're going to understand that Moses was in a dispute with Pharaoh because he was probably in communication with the most ancient deities, most likely Isis and Osiris and Anubis. And he stole the ark, and he left. He got the help of those deities to get his people free, and he left, and the whole Exodus. In fact, James Cameron, the producer of Titanic and Avatar, did a documentary on the History Channel about the Exodus, and he found on the cave walls in Egypt, where the Jews were fleeing Egypt in the Pharaoh's terror. They wrote the name of their god on the walls, and they wrote the name El. And El is not the god of the whole universe. He is a very well-known deity in ancient Babylonian Sumerian. And so now you come to the figure of Jesus, who also had to flee the terror of the persecution of King Herod, who was killing all the innocents, and his family, Joseph and Mary, brought him to Egypt, where his father was an architect, and obviously you couldn't possibly live in Egypt and not study the pyramids. And the pyramids were working in Jesus' time. All the limestone casing was on the outside, and I believe all the gold was in there. It wasn't until the Muslims, after the 6th century A.D., they destroyed the pyramids. So they were working. And Jesus probably I know for a fact I can prove this. I can actually prove it, that Jesus was living and meditating and studying all the math in the pyramid, because the math in the pyramid that I've discovered is sacredly imprinted in his Gospels.
That is amazing.
And the vibrations, see, once you take the frequencies of the pyramid as a crystal oscillator, and you can slow them down in metric and be perfectly in a smaller scale but the same information, just like the music scale. You have different scales of the same information. And you can hear it. And you can hear it making these beautiful ascending tones. There are, from the base of the pyramid up, there are 7 perfect pitched tones that are so perfectly beautiful in their ascension. If you compare them to the music scale, what we call the modern music scale, they blow it away in perfection and clarity. Like in the music scale, the base of the music scale is 440 hertz. So the A, the musical note A, is 440 waves a second. Well, the base of the Great Pyramid is 440 cubits long. So we can see, you can see that the pyramid is an instrument. It's a vibrational instrument. And B flat is 466 hertz, and C is 523, D is 587. It goes all the way up. When you play those as tones, as an ascension, they sound kind of nice on their own, but when you blend them all together, they don't sound very nice. When you play the ascension tones of the Great Pyramid, frequencies, when you blend them all together, they sound beautiful. They sound stunning. They sound so perfect that musically they blow away our music scale and our understanding of music and scale. In the Gospel of the Egyptians, which is a Christian Gnostic missing gospel, Jesus is teaching the disciples to chant the 7 sacred tones, which are vowels, 22 times each. Well, 7 divided into 22 is pi. It's 3.14. In fact, it's Egyptian pi, which is the resolution of a circle, which is one of the ratios of the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. So Jesus is teaching 7 tones, the same tones that I converted from the math and the frequencies, which means when the pyramids were turned on, they were making these 7 ascending perfect pitch tones that are better sounding than solfeggio scale, far better than our music scale. And in my film, I'll be playing them. You'll be able to see them side by side. So what was this pyramid doing but vibrating like perfect music, all of the cells of the person's body who was inside of it when it was turned on? And what would it do to you? It would turn your physical body into a beam of light, which is what Jesus could do. I'm contending now it's possible he learned to physically alter his body into these high frequency states where gospels like this is not a well-known gospel, but it's very voluminous. The Acts of John, which was banned by Pope Leo the Great. There are examples in the Acts of John, and you can Google that. The whole gospel is online. The disciples would lean into Jesus and fall right through him. His whole body was vibrating so high frequency that he wasn't physical anymore.
Wow.
Where was he learning how to do this? Jesus was an Egyptian adept, and probably by spending time in the pyramid, Isis would have appeared to him. And Isis was the first one we know in history who could resurrect the dead. She resurrected her husband and many other people physically from death. And she knew how to do it. And she was also obviously an adept of the most ancient pyramid from the era before the first dynasty. She goes that far back. So what is the gospel?
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to this documentary coming out, or this movie coming out. It sounds very, very interesting, because I think that a lot of the stuff that we're taught, and then you have evidence that's really backing up the fact that Jesus really did exist, and these other characters who are in the Bible really existed. Now it's just a matter of getting it all straight.
Yeah, see, there are people who say because ISIS, resurrected the dead, that Jesus is a myth and he never really existed. That is such nonsense. I mean, there's so much evidence of his existence. What we don't know is that resurrection was something that the ancient Egyptians knew how to do. And we know it. It's indisputable that Jesus spent his youth in Egypt. I mean, and he also, it looks like he traveled with Joseph of Arimathea to Europe when he was a young man, before his ministry even began. And he was a master at mathematics and harmonics, and learned architecture from his father, and learned everything about the math and the pyramid, because the math and the pyramids in the Gospels. The Gospel of the Egyptians clearly shows the 7 sacred tones at a ratio of 7:22, which is pi. I mean, that's pyramid math. And it gets even more amazing, because remember we talked about the 5151, the most sacred number in the pyramid. Well, if you take pi, you go to your calculator on your computer and just press the pi button, and you get the true 3.1414, and you multiply that by 0.5151, which is a lower scale of the 5151, but it's 5151, and you get 1.618, which is the golden ratio. So the 5151 is the connector between pi and phi. See, phi is the Fibonacci spiral. It's the ratio, the 1 to 1.618 of all of Fibonacci's codes that make up the ratio of the progressive spiral in galaxies and seashells. So pi is a complete circle. It tells you that you take the diameter times pi to get a complete circle, but if you multiply pi by the sacred 0.5151, you get the golden ratio. I mean, how amazing is that? And then the city of London is built on the 51.51 degrees longitude, latitude. It's one of the two. I mean, I'm mixed up right now. But they built it. And London, of course, is close to where all of the harmonic crop circles have been appearing all over, the fields of England. So there's a true ancient knowledge of the 5151. It goes way back, and there's way more. There's so much about the 5151 and its relationship to the pyramid, and tying the Ark of the Covenant to the pyramid, proving that the Ark of the Covenant belongs in the pyramid, and that Moses was truly communicating with the most ancient deities that the most ancient Egyptians knew about, and that pharaohs didn't like those deities. They wanted you to worship Pharaoh. They would, of course, been in conflict with Moses. The pharaohs weren't true Egyptians. They were oppressors. They destroyed Anubis's face on the Great Sphinx, and put his own face right over Anubis's. They ruined everything.
That is absolutely fascinating. It is. And before we run out of time here tonight, I also wanted to maybe get your insight on just how much the government and NASA really knows. I was watching some videos that you have out, and and I've seen these videos several times, as a matter of fact, where on missions that they've gone out, with the space shuttle, that they've actually reported seeing these UFOs. I've seen video of them. I've heard radio transmissions where they talked about seeing these things. So how much do they really know that they're not telling us?
Well, I mean, my first film I ever did was Evidence the Case for NASA UFOs, and we went really deep into space shuttle footage of giant luminous discs of light that were over 2 miles wide that showed up on NASA's cameras that can see into the invisible. And those events occurred when the space shuttle was passing right over where the Dogon tribe live in northwest Africa, and right over Egypt, right over the pyramids. Those UFOs were appearing when the space shuttle was passing right over. And there's no doubt we made a very profound connection to those UFOs in ancient Egypt in that film. That was a very low-budget film that got several million views on Google Video back in those days, and we didn't sell very many copies because nowadays when movies come out, my customers just rip them and put them on YouTube illegally, and it pretty much destroys the production. So nowadays, I mean, if people want to support my work, they buy our pendants at the lightstreamtechnologies.com and the wands and the film I'm going to make on the pyramids is probably going to be free on YouTube. But there's information in there that will make people realize why you really want to have your own harmonic code transmitter, and these very, very powerful crystal resonator pendants that we have. We can treat other people's jewelry as well. With if someone doesn't like our designs, they can send in their own jewelry, and we can vibrationally treat it with Pleiades, with Sirius, with religious prayers and chants, with the NASA sound of the sun, and also purely numerical harmonic codes that are all described on the website there at thelightbringtechnologies.com. So that's where we're going. Like documentary films are not being respected on YouTube. They're just they're really hard to keep them going as an economy. Keep producing them when you don't even get the money back.
I know, it is a shame if people, rip stuff off and put it on there. And, YouTube, I've got my own opinions on them. You could put up some truth and they'll take that down, but somebody can put up someone else's truth that's copyrighted and, no bother with it. And it's just amazing to me. But one last question I have here is your thoughts on reverse technology, reverse engineering on ET technology. I have this theory that maybe when we went to the moon, maybe we found some technology there, or something might have crashed here and we reversed engineered it. What do you think about that?
Well, I really went into that in one of my films, From Here to Andromeda, that question with Boyd Bushman at Lockheed. So if people want to know, really get an inside look, to see that DVD on Amazon, From Here to Andromeda. It's like a mini series. It's a really good for your money, high quality production.
I've been checking out a lot of your work, and you honestly do some fascinating work, very interesting. It would take several shows to talk about everything that you worked on, and I really hope to have you back in the near future.
I'd love to be back love to come back on your show, Michael. It's great. You came highly recommended from somebody. So
well, I appreciate that.
And it doesn't look like. What I was told is your show is not a controlled show, and that Coast to Coast AM, which I was on for 30 times, since the year 2000, I'm pretty much blacklisted from that show now because of what we talked about tonight. George Norrie just flipped out. He did not like this subject, and he's controlled. Many times I'll say this for the first time on any radio show. The producer keeps coming on the other one saying, "Don't talk about this, don't talk about that, only talk about this," and you guys are controlling me. You're telling me that you're a controlled network. I'm not allowed to talk about the pyramid codes. I'm not allowed to talk about this subject. I'm not allowed to talk about my meetings with Christ. So what can I talk about? And then eventually I got into so much trouble there. That's it. I'm not going to be on that show anymore, it looks like. So that's okay.
And you're not the first one to tell me this. I've had past guests who have done shows with me. They've gone over there, and just the mention of Late Night in the Midlands or Michael Vera and the producers, no, cannot mention them on this station, on this show. It's like, wow. And I've had Jim Mars even told me that he was told not to talk about George Bush one time when he was on there, and he did anyways, and he got blacklisted for a while. Tim Ventura, who runs AmericanAntiGravity.com, I know him. He told me years ago he was blacklisted from coast to coast. They're blacklisting so many incredible guests. I was on that show for since the year 2000 until a year ago. I haven't been on their show for a year. So I'm looking to be on shows regularly like yours that are not controlled, where I don't hear, "Oh, you can't mention this and you can't mention that." I'm like, "Oh, you guys are controlling me everywhere." Well, I appreciate that. And, I actually looked at the Coast to Coast website to see when the last time you were on there, and I think it was September of 2011.
Right, that's a year ago. It's a year ago.
Yeah. And I think the last show that they have posted up there is when you were on with Art. They call it Somewhere in Time. And as a matter of fact, I got some wind through Art Bell that he is almost ready to come out publicly on the record and talk about the real reason behind his retirement. So apparently he was controlled a bit too, and I think he should get back into it.
The very first show I did on with Art Bell, it was supposed to be on my meetings with Christ, but then I was in the middle of my research on the NASA UFO tapes, and Art Bell told me, you're not allowed to go on the show to talk about your meetings with Christ, so what else do you got for me? And I'm like, I can't believe Art Bell really wants me on his show. And I said, well, I'm in the middle of all these NASA tapes from Martin Stubbs and all of the communications I've had with NASA. So he put me on for that, and with James Oberg, and the very mention that I had the proof that their cameras can see into the invisible ultraviolet, the satellite turned off the broadcast. The internet broadcast turned off. This is the year 2000, and Art Bell, our whole show was down. We were knocked off the air. The next day, the Central Intelligence Agency sends him a letter, an email, saying that David Sreda was getting into areas that this country is not ready for at this time, and we turned off your show. Well, that put me in the biggest conspiracy in the history of his radio show, and from then on, he just wanted to have me on more and more and more. But Art was telling me right from the beginning, he actually had the executive producers of the network tell me to tell them about my meetings with Jesus, and then they told me, you can't talk about that on our network.
Yeah.
So Art Bell was the first James who told me they were controlled.
Back when Art Bell, when he started, that's when I first started listening back when he first came along with his great idea that became Coast to Coast AM, and I loved it. And, as it went on, as the years went on, Premier Network and these other ones got involved, and before you know it, it just, and then Art Bell was less and less, and George Norrie was more and more, and I'll tell you, the show has really gone downhill because, now I've always loved it, my problem is the control. I do not like shows that are controlled. They should be able to
I don't know if it's George himself or the executive, but I do know that several times with George, friends of mine are calling my wife on the cell saying that the show is turning off in this state and this state, and because I have friends in different states, and they're saying, you're gone, you're not in Oregon anymore, they just turned you off. And George, instead of capitalizing it like Art Bell would do, saying that, I got turned off when David Sreda was talking about the NASA stuff, they turned off the satellite worldwide, the whole show was gone. George Norrie the next day just puts the missing 15 minutes up on the website, doesn't say a thing about it, because he's scared, right? He's scared of the fact that David Sreda and him were turned off. I'm the only person who has been turned off so many times on that show, especially the first time with Art Bell, where they snipped the entire satellite in the whole internet broadcast. So it's controlled, there's no doubt. So to get the real truth in this information out, in fact, I'll tell you one thing real quick, because I know we're at the end. The National Geographic Channel just approved their producers for entire Latin-speaking North America, Central and South America to come and do a show with me on what we talked about tonight on National Geographic Channel. They flew the producers from Argentina. They came here, and we were ready to film, and executives called them and canceled the whole show.
Unbelievable.
It was already approved. It was already approved. And then some higher-up executive just snipped me.
Well, David, that's why they want to go after Internet radio now. They want to do everything they can to stop it because shows like mine, there is no control. I was on a network before this, and they started that control factor with me, and I quit and came and started my own network because I quit before I get controlled. I want my guests to be able to talk about anything they please, and if one of my listeners disagree with them, they're more than welcome to call in and respectfully disagree. And that's the way
it's okay. It's okay to even, just toy with some of the things we're talking about. Nobody has to believe me when I'm telling you, but I'm telling you that if I told any lie tonight, may I burn in hell. I'm so sure that everything I told you I experienced. It's the truth for me. Every being I told you I met, I really met. I'm not making it up, and I'm so sure I'm telling the truth. That's my oath. I will not burn in hell because I'm only telling you the truth. That's the oath I give you.
I thank you so much. I appreciate your honesty and you being a guest and taking the time out to be with us tonight, and I look forward to many more shows with you. And please throw out your websites quickly before we end it here. And
yes,
thank you again.
My films and meditations are at voiceentertainment.net, and my transmitter wands and the pendants are at lightstreamtechnologies.com. You can also write crystallightstream@hotmail.com to get a catalog emailed to you. And we have computer laptop shields that block radiation from going into your lap from your computer, and those are at wavetech.us. That's wavetech.us. So thank you, Michael.
Okay.
Great to be on your show. We'll definitely be back. I started doing it on my body after and during meditation, and one of the first things that happened to me is simply unbelievable who I met. There's no way I can talk about it on the radio because somebody might want to kill me. I mean, there's fanatics out there, so I have to be careful. I couldn't believe who I was meeting, and it got more and more amazing. We found that if you use the pyramid frequencies, with meditation on the body, that it amplified whatever your intention or question was. See, the heart produces, this is in our movie Quantum Communication, the heart produces a magnetic field that is at least 60 times stronger than the brain. The important thing is it's an actual magnetic field. So we know that magnetic fields are part of what triggers consciousness. Magnetic fields don't go faster than light, but I believe they trigger the DNA to send the faster than light signals. So if you could know the harmonic magnetics of a particular star system and beam your body with that, you would project a lot of your digital self to that star system. And if there was anybody in that star system who was incredibly advanced, they would see that signal because that's a faster than light signal. So I thought, where better to start than where British astronomer Robert Temple, when he wrote the Sirius Mystery, in the 70s actually was his first edition of it. He risked his entire career as a serious British astronomer to prove that mermaids and mermen came from Sirius many thousands of years ago and were some of the first founders of human civilization. And he shows, the ancient Greeks had this, half man, half fish god named Oins, and the Chinese, the oldest founders of civilization in China are these two fish gods. And so the idea of mermaids and mermen is not new. There are a lot of people who believe they have seen them, including some of the earliest explorers from Europe coming to the Americas and when they crossed the Atlantic. So anyway, I thought, well, wow, Sirius is only 8.7 light years away. I mean, that means a normal radio signal would get there pretty fast, but NASA knows the dimensions of Sirius A and B. They know the radius, which is the distance from the center of the star to the rim. And if you know the radius, you can calculate the frequencies. So I calculated, based on real NASA data, the frequencies of Sirius A and B. And I was really amazed that nobody's thought of this. I mean, this is when you have, countless billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. You've got to imagine that each one has a slightly different radius because they're not all the same size. I mean, even look at apples and oranges on a tree, and they all have slightly different radiuses. So that means they all have slightly different frequencies. And when you have sets of stars, which is what constellations are, they're set up in geometrical patterns that are completely uneven. And in that unevenness, each one of them has a unique frequency. So when you have two or more stars together vibrating as a set, like a cello and a violin versus just a single instrument, those two frequencies together are even more rare anywhere in the local galaxy. So if you were to vibrate those two frequencies into your DNA, your biophotons, because we know this, Fritz Albert Popp proved this, they go faster than light to the target. So
welcome to the program. My guest, David Serretta. Welcome to the program, my friend.
thank you, Michael.
It's a pleasure to have you. I want to thank you for taking the time out to be with us tonight. And, well, how are you doing?
Oh, very, very good. Very excited about a lot of things right now.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, I was doing a lot of listening and a lot of reading up, and I think we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation here tonight.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
maybe we could start out, what is pyramid power? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the idea that the pyramids have the ability to produce some power is not that new anymore, but it's kind of a good foundation for where I've gone. I've done a lot of studies with testing solid-state physics materials on the human body energy field. And solid state means the study of crystals and every type of gem you can imagine, and every element on the periodic table. And in this study of solid-state physics, you're looking at conductors, which are metal-type materials that can move electrons, you know, like you use copper wire and you run electrons through the copper wire like drops of water down a river, and they hit the blender turns, and the computer comes on, and the lights come on. That's all from the movement of electrons in a conductor. But in the world of semiconductors, which is more crystal-based material and gems, it was actually in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident, that three scientists, John Bardeen, Will Shockley, and Will Bratton, had finally invented the world's first miniature crystal amplifier. And they found, you know, before 47 that crystals had free electrons floating on the surface, whereas metals, the electrons were bound in the atomic shells inside of metals, so they weren't much use other than running current through a wire. But crystals had this power just sitting there, like, you know, passengers trying to get on the train. These little electrons could jump onto a wire and produce some amplification. So you could get rid of the old radio tube amplifiers and move on to crystal amplifiers. And they finally got this little crystal amplifier to work, and it became known as the transistor. And the transistor is a multi-layered, the first transistors were multi-layered materials between germanium crystal or quartz crystal and some minerals like boron or phosphorus and gold. And when I saw, like, the way transistors work to get the electrons to move from point A to point B is they have different layers of materials. So you need, like, voltage means difference, or you can create difference. Here, this is an easy way to understand it. It's a very hot sunny day and there's no wind and there's no clouds, but as soon as a cloud comes over and it cools a patch of air underneath, all of a sudden you have wind. And that's because you've created an imbalance in the temperatures, which is difference. And difference is voltage. It causes energy to flow from one place to another. So when I looked at the pyramids and I looked at the theory that they were just power supplies, I thought, you know, this isn't what they're really doing, because there's not really much power there as a power source. But they were made with these different layers of semiconductive, which means crystalline material, and some conductive material. They had a granite core and a dolomite limestone. They had two different types of limestone outer casings, and I thought, you know, those are different stratas of material. They must be trying to create difference, which means to cause energy to flow. But there's something even more amazing about transistors. See, transistors, this little invention, ended up turning into an Intel computer chip in the Silicon Valley with, in the 70s, about 2,700 little tiny crystal transistors on a single chip, and you think that's a lot. Today there's 2.7+ billion transistors on a single Intel chip.
Wow.
And each one of those little crystals is amplifying, signals, different tones of color. All of the millions of functions that are happening on your computer need amplification. So that's why we can cram so much information in a tiny cell phone and also a tiny, tiny computers now, is because of crystals. But where we're speeding towards, smaller and smaller crystals, I was looking at the pyramids saying, wait a minute, these are giant, multi-layered, semiconductive, conductive layered materials. There has to be a way greater purpose for these pyramids than anybody's ever thought of. And I realized that they were probably either early massive transistors that were in ratios of star systems. You see, everybody knows Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval have been saying, well, the ancient people of Egypt were making maps of the stars. And I was saying, no, I don't think that's what they were doing. I don't think they would build structures of that size and shape out of multi-layered material if it was merely just to mirror image the stars.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think so either. I always thought there was a much bigger purpose for them pyramids too, and I often wonder if we'll ever find out what they are.
Well, tonight you are. You're going to find out. One of the things that tipped me off is my brother, Michael, was helping this friend of his, Jeff Reeves, was building a pyramid house in Tofino, British Columbia on Chesterman's Beach, and this was way in the 70s, 80s. It was actually in the 80s. And I've been in that house, and it's perfectly flat ground, not a lot of obstructions. And when the frame was up, it was lined magnetic to magnetic north, and it was the same dimensions as the Great Pyramid, but on a smaller scale. So the slope angle and everything, the width by the height was all pi and phi. Everything was all the same harmonics of the Great Pyramid. And Jeff Reeves, the owner of the house, asked one of his workers to throw him a box cutting knife. And this guy throws him a box cutting knife, and they're pretty big, about 9 inches long, and it lands on the ground. He looks at it, turns his head, puts a hammer in, puts a nail in, and turns back to get the knife, and it's gone. And Jeff literally stopped all construction of the house and had the workers comb every inch of that flat platform, and it was gone. The thing was gone. And that really behooved me to the idea that there's a way greater power at work here than we can possibly imagine. And it's possible that pyramid energy can open up an actual stargate to move a physical object or a person to another dimension of the universe, or possibly another place, just because of the harmonics of the power of the way the geometry of a pyramid works and the materials causes electrons to move. And so the electrons are the carrier of the electric force. They're responsible for everything in electronics. They're actually still one of the smallest subatomic particles ever discovered is the electron. So I began to, I saw a film by Patrice Pouillard. It's a new film. It's on the Great Pyramids. And there was this mathematician who wouldn't show his head. And if you look at the top of the Great Pyramid, he was saying, okay, it's a square. And if you take your compass from the center to the sides and draw a circle, and you do your math, your radius times 2 times pi to get the circumference of that circle, and then you go to your corners, you get a bigger circle. And if you're working in metric, 10-base math, you subtract the smaller circle from the bigger circle, and you're left with a scale of the speed of light in metric, which is just under 300,000 kilometers per second. And you're like, how the heck could the builders have known this number in metric of all math forms? How did they know the speed of light? Because the speed of light wasn't discovered until 1972. It was not quantified accurately, incredibly accurately, until 1972. And even in 1972, it had an error of plus or minus 2 to 3%, 1 to 2%, I think it is. So I decided to do all the math myself on all 4 sides of the Great Pyramid, and the guy was right. And I said, what is the speed of light doing in the pyramid? And I said, the only thing it could be there for is that's what you measure electromagnetic frequencies that are generated by a crystal with. It's your measuring rod. So I took all of the dimensions of the Great Pyramid with the theory that it's a giant crystal oscillator, which a crystal oscillator and a transistor are kind of similar. Crystal oscillators, if you remember in the 70s, you had those, Timex watches, and it said quartz timing. You could see it said quartz on the watch. And that meant there's a little tiny piece of quartz crystal in there with some electricity running through it, causing the electrons to spin around inside the quartz at a very, very high rate of frequency, over almost 40,000 times a second, to keep accurate time. And so all you need is a little bit of electricity in something like a pyramid, a Great Pyramid, to get those electrons to start spinning. So I did all the math. It took me 3 months to I calculated 180 frequencies, and there's way more than that, but just in the base of the pyramid all the way to the top. And I was looking at the numbers and going, oh my God, nobody's ever seen these numbers. These numbers are unbelievably perfect, sequential firing sequences that are mind-blowing. So I got a signal generator program, and I started generating all the signals of all the frequencies. And I built a crystal oscillator transmitter that I put into flashlight tubing, and there's a video of this on the internet if you go to my YouTube channel, Spaceman99. And when you transmit frequencies, like a single frequency, like 432, which a lot of people like these days, and you set magnets on dishes, which I did, if you transmit any single frequency, the magnets will merely vibrate or oscillate on the dishes, which is kind of cool. But with the pyramid numbers, they start spinning around like planets spin around the sun in these giant circular orbits, and they're very aggressive. And I'd never seen anything like this. In fact, I showed it to some NASA engineers, and they said they've never seen anything like it either. The pyramid frequencies were so incredibly timed, slightly out of phase with each other, that they could cause magnets and possibly explain gravity and anti-gravity and everything under the sun in the world of zero-point energy. So I thought that, remember, we have the disappearing box cutting knife in a pyramid. And I thought, there must be a possibility that the pyramids, when the electrons start spinning in the crystal, and the pyramids are all laid out, the Great Pyramid is laid out with 3 pyramids, and they're all in the ratio of Orion's belt, a very distant star system. I said, is it possible that these 3 pyramids, all working together, powered by electricity, were able to the harmonic field that could send a person to that star system or somewhere else, another dimension of Earth or somewhere else? And it made sense to me that I could, at least by looking at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I could use these harmonics on the body, the human body, and consciousness, and see what would happen. There's a physicist named Fritz Albert Popp in Germany, good physicist, who proved, not only theorized, but proved that all living things that have DNA emit light signals, which are called biophotons, living photons of light, from the DNA faster than light speed. So let's look at the 3 pyramids in Giza, or in the ratio of Orion's belt. And Orion's belt is, those 3 stars are over 1,100 light years away, which means if you're sending a regular radio signal trying to communicate with them, it's going at the speed of light. It's going to take 1,100 years just to get there. And by the time it gets there, it's going to be massively distorted. But biophotons can go there instantly. But it gets even more amazing, because what this means is you need technology to vibrate the body's DNA with the harmonic ratios of that distant star system to tell the biophotons to go there. In fact, this is really amazing because the idea that there is such a thing and such a possibility that we could be wasting all of our time with SETI, the search for radio signals in space from another star system, would really disrupt hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. And SETI's using these giant radio telescopes. They've never seen an intelligent signal from another star system. But what if you need consciousness to interface with technology to get a proper signal? So I started transmitting in our bedroom, and I've been meditating every single day for over 30 years now. I'm 51 years old. And I start transmitting the pyramid frequencies in the room, and my wife just passes out. I'm watching the transmitter, and my wife wakes up 30 minutes later, and she says she met a space being named Ashtar, who showed her 3 major events that were about to happen on our planet. And the first one, he said, is 6 months from now. It's going to be a huge event. And she was thinking, it's got to be something like a tsunami or something like that. He didn't tell her what it was. And it came to the middle of July. And the middle of July was the biggest heat wave. The 4,000 temperature records were broken in the United States. We lost 75% of our wheat and rice and grain crops. And not only that, Europe had some of the greatest droughts, and other countries were having some of the biggest floods in history. 4,000 temperature records broken. So how the heck did sending out the pyramid frequencies get her a meeting that was incredibly accurate, and yet he showed her there's 2 more events behind that one that were even bigger. So that was just the beginning of doing this. And